Well, hi, everyone. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona, and this is Derby Watch, and we have a lot to talk about this week on Derby Watch. Some ads, some drops, some odds changes. And David, I'm going to let you go ahead and outline the biggest changes to the list this week, including 3 new additions to Derby Watch.
Well, this was the first week of the 100-point Kentucky Derby qualifying prep races, so we're bound to have some big changes on the list, and that is the case. You see the ads and the drops in the upper left-hand corner. Dermisotogake, Disarm, and Continuar all added to the list. We'll talk more about each of them in a little bit. The drops from the list were Instant Coffee, Sun Thunder, both horses that ran poorly in the Louisiana Derby, and also Mage, a horse that was kind of had a tenuous place on our list last week. He gets dropped off to make some room for some others this week. A lot of odds changes given the results of last week. The biggest mover was Kings Barnes, who we had towards the bottom of Derby Watch last week. He moves all the way up to the 4th spot. I pegged his odds at 12-1, him being an undefeated horse moving on towards the Kentucky Derby. You see a familiar name towards the top of that list. Todd Pletcher has 3 of the top 4 ranked runners on Derby Watch right now. Also, winners last week, Dermisotogake and 2 Fills. I installed each of them at 15-1. Dermisotogake, the winner of that UAE Derby, him being a new addition to the list. 2 Fills, his price got slashed from, I believe, 50-1 down to 15-1, give him his pretty fast win in the Jeff Ruby Stakes last week.
Yeah, Kings Barnes, Dermisotogake, and 2 Fills, all impressive prep race winners that we will discuss a little bit more. There were some also, David, some minor odds tweaks I guess we should at least recognize. Go Rocket Ride, Confidence Game, and Raise Cane, both you push them up just a hair from the previous week. What about those? And Disarm and Continue are opening their prices at 30 and 50.
Yeah, as I install some more shorter prices on Derby Watch as we get closer to the race, horses that are confirmed to be in the starting gate, I'm just trying to make the math work. I have a points total that I wanted to add up to at this week in this stage of the game. So I had to heighten the price on a few horses like Confidence Game, who his status continues to be a little bit uncertain. It sounds like he might train up to the Derby or perhaps run the Lexington. So I raised his odds. Raise Cane, another horse with some questions to answer. He's up to 50-1 right now. And then those horses like Disarm and Continuar, who are new on the list, both still have plenty to prove. Disarm does have upside, but he's a horse that's going to have to run a lot faster in the Kentucky Derby.
Continuar, he makes the cut via the Japan Road to the Kentucky Derby series. David, you opened up him at 50-1, and I kind of made a tongue-in-cheek comment in the Who's Hot, Who's Not segment for print. And I suggested that 50-1 might be an underlay on Continuar. After last year's result, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I don't know. I just can't make a case for Continuar at all. Let's go ahead and talk about what we did see last week. And let's start off with the Louisiana Derby. David, there were 3 Derby Watch listers going into the Louisiana Derby, only 2 coming out, and they both ran very well. The 1-2 finishers, Kings Barnes and Disarm.
Yeah, I think when we talk about this Louisiana Derby, we have to discuss it in the context of the pace situation. And we mentioned this on our preview last week, that it didn't appear that there was that much speed on the race going into it. And that's certainly how it played out on the racetrack. Kings Barnes was able to get to a pretty easy lead, set some very soft fractions, and just basically sprint away from the field at the end. So he was an impressive winner of the race, but he's one that it is 3 starts so far. While they're all victories, he really hasn't overcome too much adversity yet. So I think he's one that has some questions to answer still as he moves on to the first Saturday in May. As for Disarm, he got a pretty good trip in the sense that he saved ground most of the way, but he was one of the only horses that was actually passing rivals in the stretch and was actually gaining on Kings Barnes at the end of the race. So I do think that Disarm deserves some credit for taking that big step forward second off the layoff. And given kind of the late start that he got to his 3-year-old season, he's one that you might project could take another step forward in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these are 2 very good colts. One of them is undefeated, Kings Barnes, but he got the all-time greatest trip imaginable, loose on the lead, setting slow fractions. You can't knock a horse who's undefeated, but I think it is fair, as you brought up the question, can he handle a little bit more pace pressure? Sure. He won the allowance race rallying from behind. He won a maiden race rallying from behind. Maybe he's not a need the lead type horse, but he certainly did take advantage of advantageous conditions. He earned a 95 Beyer speed figure. Just looking over recent winners of the Louisiana Derby, a race that has been notoriously underproductive with regards to Kentucky Derby winners. Epicenter last year earned a 102 in the Louisiana Derby. He ran well in the Kentucky Derby. 2 years ago, Hot Rod Charlie earned a 99. By my standards, International Star in 2019 and 2015 both earned 97 and 96. So the 95, it's not a bad number. It's not a number that makes you, want to go rush off and make a wager on Kings Barnes in the future wager. As for Disarm, he's another horse, David, I'm just not sure what to do with. Yes, he took a step forward, second start back, and certainly has upside. He also scraped paint every step of the way, and I don't think he had significant trouble. What's your read on Disarm?
Yeah, as you said, he saved all that ground. I liked the way he was finishing in the last eighth of a mile. He was the only horse that was making up any ground on Kings Barnes at the end of the race. So maybe you could say he's a horse that took a step forward and the added distance will work for him. He certainly bred along those lines, but I don't know how much I want to upgrade anybody in this race. I mean, the 95 Beyer, it's okay. If you're really going to get into a speed figure discussion, it's a number that actually could have been lower. Craig Milkowski, who makes our Timeform US speed figures, actually has this as a much slower race. It was a day that you could have split the variant or not. So I just have some questions about the overall quality of this Louisiana Derby.
I think you and I are on the same page. Let's talk about three other horses who were in the Louisiana Derby who did not make the cut, those being Jace's Road, the third place finisher. Sun Thunder did not run well, and Instant Coffee. Jace's Road, and I know he broke open the gate before the start. It didn't seem like that significant of an incident, and he pressed that slow pace and just kind of backed up. I don't like him really coming out of the Louisiana Derby, even though I think he has almost enough points to get into the Kentucky Derby. Sun Thunder, he did not run well. Instant Coffee is the horse, David, that I almost feel sorry for this horse. I mean, he did not have a chance as the favorite in the Louisiana Derby. The pace was slow. He lost a ton of ground, and he goes from being the fourth ranked horse on Derby Watch to completely off the list because he only has 32 points. What do you make of these three horses that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, there's an argument that we should have put Jace's Road on the list because he does have those 45 points, and maybe that puts him in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Some might say that likely does put him in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. I know that neither you or I were thrilled with his performance, though. Just a little bit disappointing, especially given that pace scenario. He's a horse that showed up on track in front wraps for the first time, which is an unusual thing for the Brad Cox barn. I kind of took that as a negative sign, and he was acting odd before the race. So maybe not a big surprise he didn't run as well as some of us were expecting him to. And as for those horses that were compromised by the pace, I mean, I would also put Sun Thunder in that category, though he saved more ground than Instant Coffee. Just an unfortunate situation. They did not get the right kind of scenario that was going to lead to them earning those Kentucky Derby qualifying points that they really needed. And we'll see. Instant Coffee, I believe, has 32 points. That might be enough if there are some defections in the next few weeks. But this is the path that his connections chose. They made the decision not to run this horse since the middle of January, and they ended up in a race that didn't feature a whole lot of pace. So you might have to second guess that in retrospect.
No doubt about it. But Kings Barnes and Disarm both ran well enough to make the list. Let's turn our attention to the very first 100 points to the winner race that was run on Saturday in Dubai. And I hope, David, that some people out there were watching your On the Bubble discussion 2 weeks ago, because Derma Sotogake and the runner-up in the UAE Derby, they ran 1-2 and completed a $70 exacta. And this was kind of a wow performance by the winner, Derma Sotogake. I think you will agree.
Yeah, this was just utter domination from the Japanese contingent in this race. They finished 1, 2, 3, 4 across the wire, and a lot of separation between the first and fourth place finisher as they come onto the finish line, as Derma Sotogake was a commanding winner of this race over that runner-up, Dura Erade, who it sounds like will not proceed on to the Kentucky Derby, even though he did receive those 40 points. Derma Sotogake is planning to come to Churchill Downs, and I think he's one that we have to take seriously, Brad. I mean, we've talked before, and I'm sure you'll bring up again, about the record of UAE Derby runners coming to Churchill Downs being pretty poor overall, but it's only been in recent years that Japan has really used this race as the springboard to take a shot at the the Kentucky Derby, really just in the past 6 or 7 years. And Japan has been having a lot of success on the international stage. So maybe we have to look at that smaller sample size of just Japanese horses that have been trying to get to the Kentucky Derby. And this seems like one of the better shots that they'll have taken in recent years, because this is a horse that handles distance. He won going 1.1 miles when he was a 2-year-old and seemed like he really got better with the 1 3/16 distance as they continued to go on in this UAE Derby. So he's one that I think you have to take seriously moving on to the Derby.
I agree. I thought he was impressive visually. I know he won the race on the front end, but David, you believe that he's not necessarily a speed type horse who needs to make the front to run well. Am I right about that?
Yeah, when I did that on the bubble segment, I was watching a lot of his prior races in Japan, and he's actually an off-the-pace type, typically. He actually faced off against Continuar in Japan last year as a 2-year-old and passed that rival in the stretch coming from behind to get the job done. So I think they just sort of rode the track at Meydan to try to take advantage of what sometimes can be a speed-favoring surface to use that rail post to send to the front. So it's a feather in his cap that he has that versatility. That's something that's often a prized asset in the Kentucky Derby.
His final time in the UAE Derby, talking about Derma Sotogake, was more than 7. With the discrepancy between the UAE Derby and the Dubai World Cup was 7 seconds. It's not usually that big of a gap. Buyer speed figures do not make figures for the Dubai races, but it's a testament, I think, to Derma Sotogake that the discrepancy in final time was so extreme. It's the most extreme difference since this race became 1 3/16 at Meydan. And even though Beyer did not want to make a figure for Derma Sotogake, I would expect, if he did, that number would come in around the 106, 107 range. Also talked to Randy Moss about the same issue, and he didn't want to make a figure either. But if I had to guess, I think it would be a 106, 107 in that range, which would make Derma Sotogake the high figure horse on Derby Watch so far, which does not change the fact that Dubai to Kentucky Derby shippers, 18 of them have tried and none have hit the board. But David, you and I are in agreement. This is a serious racehorse, Derma Sotogake. The third place finisher, Continuar, he made the cut. He's going to be in the Kentucky Derby. He got beat 10 lengths, and I know that he came close to Derma Sotogake last year, but can you make any case for a Continuar?
What I will say is he's a horse that didn't break that well on Saturday, and he had to use his speed, got a wider trip covering more ground than Derma Sotogake did. And he had finished within a length of them the 2 prior times that they had met. So maybe that gap just grew within a month's time, or maybe he just didn't get as good of a trip. He's a horse that has a lot of pedigree that some American fans might be familiar with. I believe his sire is Dreyfong, so that might lead you to believe that more distance will not be better for him. On the dam side, though, Continuar's dam's a half to Amandai, that great Japanese mare. So some real pedigree power with him, but he's got to show more on the racetrack.
I'm glad you brought up the pedigree situation. I want to make one quick point. The winner, Derma Sotogake, is sired by Mind Your Biscuits. I believe this is his first crop. We all know Mind Your Biscuits as an outstanding top-class sprinter, but later in his career, he actually stretched out and won the Lucas Classic at Churchill Downs with a 1 1/8 with a 108 Beyer speed figure. So even though we think about Mind Your Biscuits as a sprinter, he did run long. So I don't think that the Stallion is going to stop Derma Sotogake from getting a 1 1/4 at Churchill Downs. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I even remember being in the press box for that very wet Whitney when Mind Your Biscuits was second to Diversify. So he's definitely a horse that could get longer distances. And based on the way he ran, I wouldn't have too many doubts about it.
Very good colt who won the UAE Derby, and he is reportedly headed to Churchill Downs soon to try to break that 0-for-18 Dubai to Kentucky slump. Okay, let's talk about the Jeff Ruby Stakes. This is a race that had only one Derby Watch lister going in, and David, I think the 2 fills kind of ran to expectations. I liked him going in. I was trying to get 7-2, didn't quite happen, but what about 2 fills in the Jeff Ruby Stakes?
Yeah, in retrospect, you could say that Larry Ravelli showed a lot of confidence securing this horse's spot in the Kentucky Derby starting gate by trying a new surface for the first time. He must have really liked the way the two Phils had trained over it to take this shot, and he was proven right. Larry Ravelli is a trainer that has a lot of experience sending out horses on synthetic surfaces for the first time, and two Phils certainly delivered. And now I think the big question with two Phils is not how good can he be, because I think we saw that on Saturday on the Tapeta surface, but can he transfer that form back to dirt? And Brad, we had talked about this a little bit beforehand. His prior two races on dirt, arguably a little better than the finishing positions might indicate, because he was sort of against the flow in both of those races, making early moves in races that featured fast paces. But that was a big step forward last weekend. And if he can run like that on Kentucky Derby Day, he's going to have a big shot.
His 101 Beyer speed figure is the highest two-turn figure this year by a 3-year-old. Yes, it was on synthetic, but David, you're right. He ran well on dirt in two previous starts. And Marcus Hirsch, in his analysis of the Jeff Ruby Stakes, noted that two Phils on the gallop out of the Jeff Ruby, he galloped out like a beast. So there's a couple ways to look at it. Either A, the synthetic surface moved him up, or B, maybe this son of Hardspun is just getting good right now at the right time. At any rate, he's on the list. His odds have dropped, and he is a definite contender moving toward the Kentucky Derby. That was the Jeff Ruby Stakes on synthetic. I don't think we can say the same thing about the Sunland Derby that was run on Sunday. Let's take a look at the race chart of the Sunland Derby. And as you can see, last place finisher, hard to figure at 1 to 2. Third place finisher, second choice, Henry Q. David, this race did not live up to any expectations that anyone had. What's your take on the Sunland Derby?
Yeah, the Sunland Park Derby was just as much about the horses that didn't show up as those that did. We had a major scratch in Fort Bragg not running, and the two heavy favorites just did not run nearly as well as they had in their prior starts, and that opened the door for a long shot. I think a lot of people still weren't expecting that long shot to be 35 to 1 shot Wild on Ice. He's a horse that I thought could have been 350 to 1 in this race based on his prior form. Just a really hardcore horse to make a case for. But this race just didn't come back that fast overall. So maybe that is why he was able to get the job done. Just other horses really did not run up to their full potential. He has been made Kentucky Derby eligible. He was not originally nominated. He did meet the late nomination deadline, or his connections did, but still sounds like his status for the Kentucky Derby has not quite been determined.
Let's take a look at the past performances of Wild on Ice and allow everybody to see just how fast, or actually how slow, Wild on Ice ran. He earned a 77 Beyer speed figure. That makes him one of the favorites to finish last in the Kentucky Derby, but his 50-point total, I guess that he could make the race if his connections so choose. So we don't expect Wild on Ice to be a contender in the Kentucky Derby. Stranger things definitely have happened, and he could be in the race if he wants to. Okay, that's a wrap. Kings Barnes, Derma Sotogake, and two Phils. Big wins last weekend to emerge as division leaders. Who will it be this week in Florida and Arkansas? Well, you're going to have to tune in to the preview segment of Derby Watch. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we'll see you in the next segment.